My sister mocked me. Where is your husband and kids? Oh, that is right. You do not have any. My mom laughed and I replied, What about the money from you and mom? Oh, that is right. I have been supporting both of you until today. The whole table went silent, and that was the night everything changed. My name is Rebecca, 34 years old and a forensic accountant who spent her adult life funding the delusion of a perfect family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The evening began in a private booth at one of the most exclusive steakhouses in downtown Chicago. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the white tablecloths, providing a stark contrast to the cold reality of my family dynamic. We were gathered to celebrate the 31st birthday of my younger sister, Samantha. She had spent the last 5 years mastering the art of playing the wealthy suburban housewife. Next to her sat her husband Terrence, a 33-year-old African-American man who loved introducing himself to strangers as a venture capitalist. He wore a custom-tailored suit and possessed a charismatic smile that he used to charm everyone. My mother Brenda absolutely adored him, viewing him as the perfect son-in-law she always deserved. Samantha extended her manicured hand across the table, intentionally angling her fingers so the restaurant lights would catch the massive new $40,000 diamond ring Terrence had supposedly just bought her. She sighed dramatically, looking at my bare hands resting on the table. It is just such a shame you have to work so hard all the time, Rebecca. She took a slow sip of her expensive champagne. I mean, look at you. 34 years old, no husband, no kids. Just endless spreadsheets and corporate fraud investigations. I do not know how you wake up in the morning without feeling completely empty. Terrence chuckled softly, adjusting his flashy designer watch, while my mother chimed in with her usual cruel tone. Do not be too hard on your sister Samantha. Numbers do not talk back or ask for a warm embrace at night. She has made her bed with her little career. Some women simply are not built for motherhood and high society. I sat there quietly letting the heavy insult hang in the air. For years I had swallowed their blatant disrespect. I was the designated family scapegoat, the workaholic spinster who existed only to be constantly compared to the radiant golden child. But today was entirely different. Today I had spent 10 grueling hours tracing offshore accounts and hidden debt for my top corporate clients. During my lunch break, I decided to apply those exact same forensic accounting skills to my own family finances. The discoveries I made were utterly sickening. I placed my linen napkin neatly on the table and picked up my glass of sparkling water. I looked directly into my sister's eyes and offered a calm, polite smile. "Where is my husband and kids?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I suppose I do not have any. But what about the money from you and Mom?" "Oh, that is right. I have been supporting both of you until today." The smug expressions instantly vanished from their faces. The silence that fell over our private booth was deafening, broken only by the ambient chatter of the crowded restaurant around us. Before anyone could fully process the gravity of what I just said, our waiter approached the table. He presented the heavy leather-bound check presenter directly to Terrence, who always made a huge show of paying the bill before privately demanding that I reimburse him the following day. "Excuse me," I said to the waiter, catching his attention. "Could you please split the check? I will only be paying for my sparkling water." Terrence stiffened in his seat, his confident facade cracking as he stared at the leather booklet. My mother slapped her hand against the table, her face flushing a furious shade of red. "Rebecca, what on earth is wrong with you?" she hissed maliciously, leaning forward across the table. "What do you mean you have been supporting us? And why are you intentionally embarrassing Terrence in front of the waitstaff? You know perfectly well he is treating us tonight to celebrate his massive new crypto startup." I shifted my gaze to Terrence, who was suddenly avoiding eye contact and staring intently at the printed receipt. The dinner bill was easily over $4,000, filled with imported Wagyu beef, rare black truffles, and multiple bottles of high-end wine. I am not embarrassing anyone, Mother, I replied, my tone flat, clinical, and strictly professional. I am simply adjusting my financial portfolio. I am officially cutting out bad investments. And as of this afternoon, my charity to this family is permanently closed. My mother stared at me for a long, heavy second before letting out a sharp, condescending laugh. She leaned back against the plush leather booth, crossing her arms over her silk blouse. "You are being absolutely ridiculous, Rebecca," she sneered, her voice dripping with pity. "Cut us off. What charity are you even talking about? I do not need a single dime of your little accountant salary. I have the trust fund your father left me. He made sure I would be taken care of for the rest of my life, unlike you who cannot even find a man to buy you dinner." Samantha nodded in agreement, rolling her eyes. "Seriously, Rebecca, you are embarrassing yourself. Dad was a successful businessman. He left Mom a fortune. You are just jealous because Terrence is actually building wealth while you are stuck crunching numbers in a cubicle." I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. Instead, I calmly reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my iPad Pro. I unlocked the screen and opened a highly encrypted financial dossier I had prepared earlier that afternoon. I turned the brightness all the way up and slid the sleek device across the white tablecloth, stopping it right in front of my mother's half-eaten plate of Wagyu beef. "Take a good look at those documents, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the steakhouse like a scalpel. "Because that is the real legacy your husband left behind." Brenda frowned, adjusting her designer reading glasses as she peered at the screen. Terrence and Samantha leaned in close. The document displayed was a finalized bankruptcy filing from 6 years ago, dated just 2 weeks before my father passed away from a sudden heart attack. I watched the color slowly drain from my mother's face as I narrated the harsh reality. "Dad did not leave you a fortune, Mother. His construction company was hemorrhaging money for years. He took out massive hidden loans, leveraged the house, and drained every single retirement account you two had to cover his bad bets. When he died, his net worth was negative $2 million. There was no grand estate. There was no trust fund." "That is a lie," Brenda gasped, her hands trembling as she tried to swipe away the PDF, only to reveal the next document in the file. "I receive $8,000 on the first of every single month. The bank statements say it is a dividend payout from his private trust. I have the paperwork to prove it." "You have the paperwork that I fabricated for you," I corrected her coldly. "I am a forensic accountant, Mother. My entire career is built on hiding, finding, and structuring money. 6 years ago, when the creditors came knocking to seize your home and leave you on the street, I stepped in. I negotiated the debts down. And to protect your fragile ego, I set up a shell account that disguised my own money as a monthly dividend from Dad." Samantha let out a loud scoff. "You are insane. You do not make enough to give Mom $8,000 a month. That is almost $100,000 a year." I turned my gaze to my sister, letting the full weight of my resentment surface. "I do make that much, Samantha. In fact, I make significantly more. But you never noticed because I live in a modest apartment and drive a 5-year-old Honda. I work 80-hour weeks auditing corrupt multinational corporations, digging through thousands of spreadsheets, until my eyes bleed, missing holidays and weekends. I sacrificed my youth, my social life, and my peace of mind so that Mother could keep her country club membership and you could pretend you still belong to high society." Terrence cleared his throat, suddenly looking very nervous. "Now wait a minute. Rebecca, let us not say things we cannot take back. If what you are saying is true, we should discuss this privately as a family." "We are not a family, Terrence," I replied sharply. "A family does not mock the person keeping a roof over their head. A family does not sit at a $4,000 dinner and ridicule the woman funding their entire existence. Every designer outfit you two are wearing, every spa day, Mother enjoys every tank of gas in that new Porsche you boast about. It was all subsidized by my blood, sweat, and tears." My mother was hyperventilating now, staring at the banking app I had just opened on the iPad screen. It showed the active recurring transfer mandate. $8,000 scheduled to leave my primary account and enter hers in exactly 3 days. You have been living on my charity, I whispered, leaning forward so they could hear every single syllable. And you repaid me with nothing but cruelty and contempt. I reached across the table and tapped the bright red button on the screen that read, Cancel Auto Transfer. A confirmation pop-up appeared. Are you sure you want to permanently cancel this recurring payment, Rebecca? No, my mother choked out, her voice cracking with genuine panic. Please, the mortgage is due next week. I looked her dead in the eye and pressed confirm. The screen went dark, severing the financial umbilical cord I had maintained for 6 long years. My mother slumped back into the plush leather seating, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically struck by a heavy blow. But Samantha was not going down without a fight. She slammed both of her hands violently onto the table, rattling the crystal wine glasses and sloshing expensive red wine onto the pristine white tablecloth. You are completely delusional, she screamed, her voice shrill enough to make the neighboring tables turn and stare in our direction. You are just a bitter, jealous spinster who cannot handle the fact that my life turned out perfectly while yours is completely empty. You fabricated those fake documents because you want to destroy my happiness. Look at my husband. Look at Terrence. He is a genius. He is a highly respected venture capitalist managing millions in elite crypto assets. He just bought me a brand new Porsche Cayenne in cash yesterday afternoon. Do you really think we need your pathetic little accountant salary to survive? We are incredibly rich, Rebecca. You are nothing but a sad, lonely woman trying to drag us down to your own miserable level out of pure spite. I did not raise my voice or react to her venom. I simply looked at Terrence. Underneath the dim, romantic lighting of the steakhouse, he was suddenly sweating profusely. His custom-tailored suit suddenly looked a little too tight, his broad, confident posture collapsing inward. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. Is that right, Terrence? I asked, sweetly, leaning forward just a fraction. A cash purchase for the new Porsche. That is truly fascinating, because according to the public registry, which took me less than 3 minutes to pull up this morning, that exact vehicle has a massive lien on it from a high-interest subprime auto lender, a specific lender that only specializes in desperate clients with credit scores well below 500. Funny how a millionaire tech investor needs a predatory loan just to put his wife in a luxury car. Samantha whipped her head around to look at her husband, her eyes wide with sudden panic. Terrence swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing completely, refusing to meet her gaze. He stared down at his empty plate, his jaw clenched tight. Before Samantha could demand an explanation from him, the waiter reappeared at our table. He was no longer carrying himself with the polished, invisible elegance of fine dining staff. Instead, he looked incredibly tense, shifting his weight awkwardly from foot to foot. He was holding the heavy leather check presenter, but it remained open in his hands. Sir, the waiter murmured, leaning down close to Terrence to keep his voice low. I am terribly sorry to interrupt your beautiful evening, but there seems to be a significant issue with your payment method. Terrence snatched the booklet from the waiter's hands, his fingers shaking slightly. What are you talking about? He snapped, trying to project authority but failing miserably. That is an exclusive black card. There are no limits on that account. Run it again right now. Your machine must be broken. I have already run it 3 separate times, sir. The waiter replied, his voice tightening with frustration. The system is returning a hard decline every single time. The bank issuer specifically flagged the transaction for insufficient funds. And I must also inform you that the secondary card you provided earlier has also been declined for the exact same reason. Samantha let out a loud, theatrical gasp. Terrence, what is he talking about? She demanded, her manicured nails digging sharply into his arm. Tell him to fix it. Tell him who you are. Terrence fumbled desperately through his designer leather wallet, pulling out 2 more credit cards and shoving them blindly at the waiter. Try these, he ordered, his voice cracking with panic. Just run them both. Split the bill if you have to. Do whatever it takes. The waiter sighed heavily and walked back toward the serving station. My mother was practically hyperventilating now, alternating between glaring at me with pure hatred and staring in sheer terror at her son-in-law. The grand illusion was shattering right before their eyes. Less than 2 minutes later, the waiter returned. This time, he was not alone. He was accompanied by the general restaurant manager, a tall, imposing man in a sharp tuxedo who did not look amused in the slightest. The manager placed the stack of plastic credit cards firmly on the center of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," the manager began, his tone perfectly polite but laced with pure steel. "Every single card provided has been declined. Several of them are actually showing up as canceled by the issuer due to severe delinquency. Your total bill for this evening is $4,215. Terrence stood up, trying to puff out his chest and salvage his pride. "Listen here," he stammered defensively. "I am a major venture capital investor in this city. There is clearly a banking error going on with my portfolio tonight. I will call my wealth manager in the morning and have this sorted out immediately. Just send me an invoice." "We do not send invoices to first-time guests, sir," the manager replied sharply, crossing his arms. "This is a business, not a charity. I need a valid form of payment right now. If you cannot settle this bill immediately, I will have absolutely no choice but to lock the front doors and call the Chicago Police Department to report a theft of services." Section 4, 800 words. Terrence's jaw dropped, his eyes darting frantically between the imposing restaurant manager and the stack of useless plastic on the table. "But this is a simple banking error," he stammered, his voice rising in an embarrassing squeak that completely shattered his suave venture capitalist persona. "There has to be a system glitch. Do you have any idea who I am? I manage a crypto portfolio worth millions. You cannot threaten me with the police over a minor misunderstanding." The manager did not blink. His posture remained rigidly professional, but his tone was icy. "I do not care about your crypto portfolio, sir. I care about the $4,000 you owe this establishment. If you do not have another form of payment, I am instructing my staff to contact the authorities right now." Samantha was practically hyperventilating, her hands clutching her designer silk dress. "Terrence, do something," she hissed. "You cannot let them arrest us. Call your wealth manager. Call anyone." My mother, Brenda, looked like she was about to faint. She grabbed her pearl necklace, gasping for air, before turning her furious gaze back to me. "Rebecca, fix this immediately," she demanded, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "Pay this bill right now. Stop throwing this petty tantrum and do what is right for your family." I calmly stood up from the leather booth, smoothing out the wrinkles in my tailored slacks. I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and placed it neatly on the table. "That is for my sparkling water and a generous tip for the waiter," I said quietly. "As for the rest of this feast, that is entirely your responsibility. I am officially off the clock both professionally and personally." "Rebecca, you cannot just leave us here!" Samantha shrieked, her voice echoing across the quiet dining room. Everyone was staring now. Diners at adjacent tables had stopped eating, openly watching the spectacle. "Watch me," I replied simply. I turned my back on them and walked away. The sound of my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor felt like the steady beat of a victory drum. Behind me, I could hear Terrence shouting at the manager, my mother sobbing loudly, and Samantha screaming my name. I did not look back. Not even once. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the steakhouse and stepped out into the crisp, cool Chicago night air. For the first time in 6 years, the crushing weight I had been carrying on my shoulders was gone. I took a deep breath, inhaling the city breeze, and felt an overwhelming sense of absolute freedom. I walked 2 blocks to the parking garage where I had left my 5-year-old Honda. It was not a luxury vehicle, but it was mine, fully paid off, and it did not have a predatory lien attached to it. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out onto the busy city streets. Before I even reached the expressway, my phone began to vibrate violently in the cup holder. It buzzed continuously, lighting up the dark interior of the car. I ignored it until I was safely parked in the secure garage of my downtown condo building. When I finally picked up the device, I had 17 missed calls and 5 lengthy voice notes, all from my mother. I locked my car doors, leaned back in the seat, and pressed play on the first audio message. Brenda's voice blasted through the phone speaker, distorted by her own rage and panic. "You are an absolute monster, Rebecca," she screamed through the audio file. "How could you abandon your own flesh and blood like that?" The police came. They escorted us into the back office like common criminals. Terrence had to surrender his Rolex watch as collateral just to keep us out of handcuffs. "You humiliated us in front of the entire city." I tapped the next voice note. Her tone shifted from anger to desperate delusion. "I know you did something to Terrence's bank accounts, Rebecca. You are a forensic accountant. You know how to hack into these systems. You froze his money just to make him look bad, did you not? You need to fix this right now. You need to turn my dividend transfer back on, and you need to wire Terrence the money for that dinner. If you do not fix this by tomorrow morning, I will never forgive you. I will disown you completely." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. She was threatening to disown the only person keeping her out of a homeless shelter. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. As I stepped out of the car and headed toward the elevator, a new notification popped up on my screen. It was a text message from Samantha. I stopped walking and read the words glowing in the dim light of the parking garage. "You are dead to us, Rebecca. Terrence is bringing his lawyers tomorrow morning. You are going to pay for humiliating us, and we are going to take everything you have." I locked my phone, slipped it into my pocket, and smiled as the elevator doors opened. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning began exactly at 6 o'clock with my usual routine. I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, sat by the floor to ceiling windows of my downtown luxury condo, and reviewed the European market reports. My sanctuary was silent, pristine, and entirely paid for by my own hard work. The peace lasted exactly until 8:15. The aggressive pounding on my front door echoed through the hallway, vibrating against the hardwood floors. It was not a polite knock. It was the frantic, entitled hammering of people who believed the world owed them an immediate response. I checked the security feed on my wall monitor. Brenda, Samantha, and Terrence were huddled in the corridor. Terrence was pacing furiously, his expensive designer suit looking rumpled, as if he had actually slept in it. Samantha was frantically chewing her perfectly manicured thumbnail, and my mother was glaring directly into the camera lens. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the heavy oak door open. Before I could even say good morning, the three of them shoved past me, invading my living space without a shred of hesitation or an ounce of apology. "Nice place," Terrence muttered, his eyes darting around the expansive open-concept living room, taking in the custom leather furniture and the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. "You have been holding out on us, Rebecca." I closed the door slowly, leaning against it with my arms crossed. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I assumed you would be busy dealing with the severe fallout from your $4,000 dine and dash." Samantha scoffed, dropping her oversized designer handbag onto my pristine glass coffee table. "Do not act so self-righteous, Rebecca. Terrence handled the restaurant manager just fine. He had to liquidate a minor asset to cover the bill, but everything is perfectly under control. We are not here to talk about last night anyway. We are here to talk about the future of this family and how you are going to fix the situation." My mother stepped forward, her face a mask of stern authority. She had completely dropped the tearful, desperate victim act from her unhinged voicemails the night before. Now she was back to playing the fierce matriarch who expected total obedience. "Your sister is right," Brenda declared, aggressively adjusting her silk scarf. "We are willing to forgive your little outburst at the steakhouse. Families fight, and we move past it. But right now, Terrence is facing a temporary cash flow issue with his crypto startup, and you are going to help him bridge the gap." I let out a short, genuine laugh. "A temporary cash flow issue. Terrence, your primary credit cards were declined, your secondary cards were flagged for delinquency, and your wife's luxury car is heavily leveraged by a predatory subprime lender. You do not have a cash flow issue. You are completely insolvent." Terrence clenched his jaw, his dark eyes flashing with sudden anger. He stepped closer to me, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me. You do not understand how high-level venture capital works, he spat, attempting to regain his misplaced authority. My assets are tied up in digital currency ledgers and international offshore expansion projects. I have a massive payout coming in less than 90 days from an institutional investor. But the traditional banks are being incredibly difficult about short-term liquidity. I need capital right now to keep the servers running, the developers paid, and the company afloat. Samantha rushed to his side, linking her arm tightly through his. It is a guaranteed return, Rebecca. Terrence just needs a small bridge loan to get through the month. $300,000. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the sheer magnitude of her delusion. $300,000, I repeated slowly. And exactly where do you expect me to get $300,000 in liquid cash on a random Tuesday morning? My mother smiled, a cold, calculated expression that made my stomach turn. You do not need liquid cash, she said smoothly. You own this luxury condo. We already checked the county property records online. You have no mortgage on this place. It is completely paid off. All you need to do is go to the bank today and take out a home equity line of credit. You pull the equity out of your condo, wire the $300,000 to Terrence's business account, and he will pay you back with 20% interest by the end of the quarter. It is the absolute least you can do after lying to us about your massive income for 6 years. The absolute audacity of the demand hung heavy in the quiet air of my living room. They wanted me to leverage my home, my sanctuary, the single most valuable asset I owned, to fund a failing crypto scheme run by a man who could not even afford a steak dinner. Absolutely not, I said, my voice dropping an octave, ringing with absolute finality. I am not taking out a loan against my home for you, Terrence. I am not giving this family another single dime. The charity is permanently over. Now pick up your bags, Samantha, and all of you get out of my house right now. I reached for the brass handle of the front door to pull it open, but a large, heavy hand slammed flat against the wood right above my head. A loud crack echoed through the entryway. I froze. Terrence stood inches away from me, his chest heaving, his charming facade completely destroyed. He leaned down, his breath hot against my face, his eyes wide and unhinged. You are not listening to me, Rebecca. Terrence growled, his voice a low, dangerous threat as his massive frame physically blocked the only exit. I am not asking for a favor. I need that money today, and you have absolutely no choice. I stared directly into Terrence's eyes. I did not shrink back. Working in forensic accounting meant I had faced down desperate corporate executives who had millions on the line. A cornered fraudster is always the most dangerous, and Terrence was severely panicking. Before I could order him to step away from my door, the heavy oak panel swung open the rest of the way. A man I had not noticed on the security feed stepped out from the hallway shadows and walked right into my living room without an invitation. He wore a cheap gray suit and carried a scuffed leather briefcase. He had slicked back hair and a predatory smirk that told me everything I needed to know about his professional ethics. Allow me to introduce myself, the man said, his voice overly confident. My name is Richard Lawson. I am the legal counsel representing Terrence and Samantha. And your brother-in-law is absolutely correct. You really do not have a choice in this matter. I took a slow step back, putting distance between myself and Terrence, and crossed my arms defensively. You brought a lawyer to my apartment to extort me for a home equity loan, I asked, genuinely amused by the absurdity. This is a new low even for this family. Richard Lawson placed his briefcase on my glass coffee table, popped the brass latches, and pulled out a manila envelope. He slid a notarized document out of the folder and handed it directly to me. It is not extortion, Rebecca. It is the swift enforcement of a legally binding family trust mandate. My mother crossed her arms, looking incredibly proud. Your father knew you were selfish, Rebecca, she stated firmly. He knew you would try to hoard your money while your sister struggled, so he made sure to put it in writing before he passed away. I looked down at the paper. It was a poorly drafted legal directive dated 7 years ago, allegedly bearing my late father's signature. The document claimed that as the eldest daughter and a licensed financial professional, I was officially designated as the lifelong financial guarantor for Samantha. It explicitly stated that I was legally obligated to maintain her standard of living and provide necessary capital for her husband's business ventures. Terence smirked, puffing his chest out. That signature has been authenticated, he lied smoothly, his eyes cold. If you refuse to wire the $300,000 today, my lawyer will file a breach of fiduciary duty lawsuit against you in civil court tomorrow morning. Richard Lawson nodded enthusiastically, tapping the forged paper. We will not just sue you for the money, Rebecca. We will file a formal complaint with the State Accounting Board. We will attach this mandate to a petition to temporarily freeze your certified public accountant license pending an exhaustive investigation into your financial malpractice. You will not be able to work, you will not be able to sign off on corporate audits, and your career will be over. Samantha stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with triumphant malice. Just sign the loan paperwork, Rebecca. It is only $300,000. You will make it back in a few years with your salary. Why throw away your entire career just because you are too stubborn to help your sister? I stood in the center of my living room holding the forged document. I looked at my mother, who was nodding in agreement. I looked at Samantha, who genuinely thought she had finally won. And I looked at Terence, who was sweating profusely, but smiling, convinced his pathetic intimidation tactics had broken my spirit. I did not flinch. I did not yell. I simply handed the piece of paper back to the sleazy lawyer. The signature is traced from his old driver license, I noted clinically, and the notary stamp is from a firm that was dissolved 3 years ago. Submitting this to a judge would be an automatic felony for forging a legal instrument. But honestly, Terence, I am actually much more interested in why you need this cash so desperately today. Terence scoffed, rolling his eyes as his facade slipped slightly. I already told you. My crypto startup needs temporary liquidity. I reached into the pocket of my slacks and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen and opened an audio file I had received from a private investigator I kept on retainer. Is that so? I asked sweetly. Because that is not what you were screaming about behind a warehouse in the industrial district 2 nights ago. I pressed play and turned the volume all the way up. The pristine silence of my luxury condo was instantly shattered by the sound of Terence crying. Not just crying, but violently sobbing and begging for his life. Please, man, just give me 1 week. Terrence's voice screamed through the phone speaker, accompanied by the heavy sound of someone being shoved hard against a brick wall. I swear I will get you the 300 grand. My sister-in-law is loaded. I will force her to give me the cash. Just put the gun away. Please, do not hurt me. I paused the recording and looked up. The smug smiles had completely vanished from their faces. Terence took a sudden stumbling step backward, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the polished hardwood floor. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and terrified. The sleazy lawyer Richard Lawson suddenly found the ceiling of my apartment fascinating quietly, stepping away from the coffee table. He was a bottom feeder, but even he knew when a client had just committed a massive unforced error. Samantha stared at her husband, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. Terence, who was that on the recording? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Why were you begging someone not to shoot you? What loan shark is she talking about? Terence opened his mouth, but only a pathetic raspy sound came out. He swallowed hard, desperately trying to formulate another lie. It is nothing, babe, he finally stammered, holding his hands up defensively. It is just a highly aggressive private equity firm. They use heavy-handed collection tactics. It is standard in the crypto industry. Rebecca is just trying to manipulate you. I smiled, shaking my head at his sheer dedication to the delusion. Standard industry tactics, I asked rhetorically. They were threatening to put a bullet in your kneecaps over $300,000, Terence. But the most tragic part of this entire situation is not that you are drowning in debt to violent criminals. The real tragedy is what you actually spent the money on. I walked over to my console table, picked up a thick manila folder, and tossed it onto the glass coffee table right next to Richard Lawson's forged document. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "I am a forensic accountant, Samantha," I said, turning my attention completely to my sister. "When I traced Terrence's accounts yesterday, I did not just look at his fake corporate ledgers. I looked at your joint checking account, the one you use for the mortgage on your mansion." Samantha looked down at the folder, then back at me, her eyes wide with a creeping sense of dread. "What is in there, Rebecca?" she whispered. "I suggest you open it," I replied calmly. Samantha reached out with trembling hands. She flipped the folder open. Inside were copies of wire transfers, hotel receipts, and screenshots of high-end boutique purchases. I watched her perfectly made-up face contort in horror as her eyes scanned the highlighted lines of financial data. "Over the past 6 months, Terrence has systematically drained $50,000 from your joint account." I explained, my voice steady and clinical. "He did not invest it in digital currency. He did not use it to pay his developers. He wired it directly to a 22-year-old woman who goes by the online handle Sugar Baby Mia." Terrence lunged forward, trying to snatch the folder away from his wife. "Do not look at that, Samantha. It is fabricated. She photoshopped all of it." Samantha snatched the folder out of his reach, her eyes darting across a specific receipt. A lease agreement for a luxury penthouse in downtown Miami, a Cartier bracelet, a first-class ticket to the Bahamas, all paid for with funds from the account she thought was holding their life savings. "You bought her a Cartier bracelet," Samantha shrieked, her voice cracking with pure agony. "We are about to lose our house and you spent $50,000 on a mistress." Without a second of hesitation, Samantha raised her hand and slapped Terrence across the face. The sharp cracking sound echoed loudly through the living room. Terrence stumbled back, clutching his cheek, his eyes wide with shock. "You lying, cheating coward!" Samantha screamed, tears streaming down her face, completely ruining her expensive makeup. "I defended you. I came here to beg my sister for money to save your business, and you have been funding some college girl's luxury lifestyle." I stood silently watching the grand illusion of the golden child's perfect marriage crumble to dust. But the victory was interrupted by my mother. Brenda rushed forward, shoving Samantha aside, and stood protectively in front of Terrence. She turned to face me, her eyes burning with an irrational, misplaced fury. "How dare you, Rebecca?" my mother hissed, pointing an accusing finger at my chest. "How dare you do this to your sister?" I blinked, genuinely caught off guard by her sheer audacity. "How dare I asked. "Mother, he just stole $50,000 from his own wife to pay a mistress, and he is trying to extort me to pay off a loan shark." "That does not matter," Brenda screamed, her face red with rage. "You are deliberately trying to ruin a marriage. You dug up all this garbage just to humiliate him because you are bitter and alone. Terrence is a man under an immense amount of pressure. Men make mistakes when they are stressed. If you had just given him the money in the first place, he would not have needed to look for comfort outside his home." I stared at her, completely astounded. She was actually blaming me for her son-in-law's infidelity. "You have the money, Rebecca," Brenda continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "You could fix all of this right now. Write the check for $300,000, pay off those aggressive investors, and let Terrence and Samantha go to couples counseling to heal their family. You are destroying this family over a few pieces of paper." Richard Lawson, the sleazy lawyer, quietly closed his briefcase. "I think I am going to leave now," he muttered quickly, heading for the door. I looked at my mother, then at my sobbing sister, and finally at Terrence, who was hiding behind his mother-in-law like a frightened child. The sheer toxicity of these people was suffocating. "Get out of my apartment," I commanded, pointing straight at the open doorway. "All of you. Right now. If you are not in the hallway in 5 seconds, I am calling building security, and they will physically drag you out." Brenda opened her mouth to argue. She wanted to have the last word, as she always did, but the cold, dead look in my eyes finally made her stop. She grabbed her purse, shooting me a look of pure hatred, before marching out the door. Samantha followed closely behind, still sobbing into her hands, completely shattered by the reality of her husband's infidelity. Terrence lingered for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting toward the folder on the coffee table. Leave it, I warned him sharply. I have digital backups sent to 3 secure servers. Terrence swallowed hard, his jaw tight, and backed out into the hallway. I slammed the heavy oak door shut and immediately threw the deadbolt. The sudden silence in my condo was glorious, but I knew it was only the calm before the storm. When you corner toxic people, they do not reflect on their mistakes, they retaliate. It only took 3 hours for the digital assault to begin. They moved faster than I anticipated, armed with sheer desperation. I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping coffee and reviewing a client portfolio when my phone started vibrating violently. It was not just one notification, it was an absolute avalanche. My screen lit up with dozens of text messages, missed calls, and Facebook alerts. I unlocked my phone and opened the social media app. Right at the top of my feed was a live video my mother had posted just 20 minutes earlier. It already had over 100 comments. I tapped the video. Brenda was sitting on her living room couch, clutching a crumpled tissue, her face perfectly framed to show her tear-streaked cheeks. She was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance. I never thought I would have to broadcast my private family pain to the world, Brenda sobbed to the camera, dabbing her eyes dramatically. But my eldest daughter, Rebecca, has done the unthinkable. For years I trusted her to manage the trust fund her late father left me. But this morning I discovered she has been secretly draining my retirement accounts. She left her own mother completely destitute just because she is a bitter, lonely woman who resents her sister's happy marriage. I stared at the screen, genuinely impressed by her ability to lie with such effortless conviction. She had taken my 6 years of financial sacrifice and twisted it into elder abuse. The extended family ate it up instantly. My text messages were a barrage of pure vitriol from aunts, uncles, and cousins. "You are an absolute monster, Rebecca," my Aunt Diane wrote. "How could you steal from your widowed mother? Enjoy your money, you miserable spinster. You are dead to all of us," a cousin messaged. They were crawling out of the woodwork to condemn me, weaponizing my single status and my career against me. In their eyes, the successful unmarried woman was the perfect villain, while the weeping mother and the glamorous younger sister were the tragic victims. They did not ask for my side of the story, they just wanted a target. I did not reply to a single message. I simply went down the list, blocking every phone number and restricting every social media profile. I felt a brief sting of betrayal, but it was quickly washed away by cold determination. If they wanted to burn the bridge, I was more than happy to hand them the matches. But my mother's smear campaign was just a distraction. Terrence and Samantha were not content with just ruining my reputation at family reunions. They wanted to destroy the one thing that actually gave me power: my career. As I finished blocking the last relative, a new notification chimed on my laptop. It was an email marked with high importance from the internal server of my accounting firm. The sender was the Director of Human Resources, and the managing partner was copied on the thread. I opened the email, my eyes scanning the crisp corporate text. The subject line read, "Urgent disciplinary meeting required immediately." Rebecca, the email began. "Please report to the main conference room at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. We have received an anonymous whistleblower tip containing detailed financial logs that accuse you of embezzling corporate funds from one of our largest clients. Your system access has been temporarily suspended, pending a full internal investigation." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Terrence had made his move, and he was playing a dangerous game. I arrived at the towering glass and steel building of my accounting firm exactly at 7:45 the next morning. When I swiped my security badge at the main turnstile, the scanner blinked a solid red. The security guard, a man who had greeted me every morning for the past 5 years, looked away uncomfortably as he manually buzzed me through the gate. My system access was indeed completely suspended. I was essentially a ghost in my own workplace. I took the executive elevator to the top floor and walked straight into the main glass-walled conference room. Sitting at the long mahogany table were David, the Director of Human Resources, and Thomas, the senior managing partner of the firm. Neither of them offered a polite smile or a standard morning greeting. The atmosphere in the room was incredibly dense, suffocating under the heavy weight of severe corporate liability. "Have a seat," Rebecca Thomas said, his voice flat and strictly professional. He did not look at me with the usual respect he reserved for his top forensic investigator. He looked at me like I was a massive legal threat to his entire company. I sat down, folding my hands neatly on the polished wood. David cleared his throat and slid a thick leather-bound folder across the large table toward me. "Late last night, our external corporate compliance portal received a highly detailed whistleblower submission." David explained, his tone completely devoid of warmth. "The documents inside that folder allege that over the past 8 months, you have been systematically diverting funds from one of our largest international logistics clients. The anonymous tipster claims you authorized a series of fraudulent offshore wire transfers routing millions in corporate funds into a private shell account registered under your name in the Cayman Islands." I opened the folder and slowly turned the crisp pages. I had to hand it to Terrence. He was a spectacular con artist when it came to visual formatting. The printed spreadsheets looked incredibly official at first glance. There were fake transaction identification numbers, manipulated client ledgers, and forged authorization signatures that looked remarkably like mine. He had spent hours crafting this elaborate lie. His strategy was brutally obvious. By framing me for massive corporate embezzlement, Terrence intended to get me fired, blacklisted from the financial industry, and potentially indicted by federal authorities. He figured that once I lost my lucrative salary and faced utter ruin, I would be desperate enough to beg my family for help. He expected me to cave to the pressure, agree to leverage my condo, and hand him the $300,000 to make the anonymous tipster miraculously disappear. It was textbook blackmail from a desperate man. Unfortunately for Terrence, he was a failing crypto scammer trying to outsmart a seasoned forensic accountant. "These are very serious allegations," Rebecca Thomas said, leaning forward and resting his elbows heavily on the table. "If these wire transfers are verified by our internal audit team, we will have absolutely no choice but to terminate your employment immediately and hand this entire file over to the authorities." I did not panic. I did not raise my voice in righteous indignation. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed strangely in the tense, silent conference room. Thomas frowned deeply, clearly taken aback by my calm reaction. "Do you find corporate fraud amusing?" he asked sharply, his patience wearing thin. "Not at all, Thomas," I replied calmly, tapping my index finger against the fabricated ledger. "I find amateur hour amusing." "Have you actually looked at the routing numbers on these alleged offshore transfers?" David and Thomas exchanged a quick, uncertain glance across the table. I flipped the heavy binder around and pushed it back toward the managing partner. "Look closely at line 42. The routing number listed for the Cayman Island Bank contains 11 numeric digits. International wire transfers use specific codes containing both letters and numbers. Furthermore, the transaction hash listed right next to it is formatted exactly like a blockchain ledger entry. Traditional international banks do not use crypto transaction hashes for standard corporate wire transfers." Thomas adjusted his glasses, peering closely at the printed document. He was a brilliant accountant, but he had been temporarily blinded by the initial shock of the severe accusation. As he scrutinized the numbers, his rigid posture began to relax slightly. "The person who submitted this tip is incredibly familiar with cryptocurrency exchanges, but knows absolutely nothing about institutional banking regulations," I explained, leaning back in my leather chair. "It is a fabricated smear campaign designed to extort me over a personal family matter. But we cannot just dismiss an official whistleblower complaint based on a formatting error," David interjected, nervously adjusting his tie. "We still have to investigate the source of the email." I smiled at the HR director, a cold, calculating smile that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. "You do not have to investigate the source, David, because I already did. When the anonymous email hit our external server last night, my personal firewall flagged the inbound data packet. I placed a tracking software script on the IP address before they could even log off. I opened my leather briefcase, pulled out a slim blue folder, and slid it precisely across the mahogany table. Inside that folder is a complete digital forensic report, I said. The IP address used to send the whistleblower email resolves directly to a commercial suite in the financial district. A suite currently leased to a company called Apex Digital Ventures, which is the corporate shell entity owned entirely by my brother-in-law, Terrence. Thomas flipped open the blue folder. He traced the data points with his expensive silver pen. I also ran a cross-reference on the MAC address of the device used to send the email. I continued. It matches the exact hardware profile of the laptop Terrence used to log into my home network 6 months ago during a family holiday dinner. He thought he was being an untraceable criminal mastermind, but he left a digital footprint the size of a billboard. The silence in the conference room was heavy, but the tension had shifted entirely. Thomas closed the blue folder and took a deep breath. His face hardened, the initial suspicion replaced by a cold corporate fury. He is using this firm, my firm, to blackmail one of my senior investigators over a petty personal family dispute, Thomas stated, his voice dangerously quiet. Exactly, I replied. He wants you to fire me, so I become desperate enough to fund his failing crypto scheme. David, the HR director, let out a sharp breath, shaking his head in disbelief. This is incredibly severe, Rebecca. Submitting a fraudulent whistleblower complaint to a financial institution is a federal offense. We have an ethical and a strict legal obligation to report this. Thomas leaned forward, steepling his fingers on the polished wood. We will do much more than report it, Rebecca. I am offering you the full weight of our corporate litigation department. We have 30 of the most ruthless attorneys in Chicago on retainer. We will file a massive civil suit against Terrence and his company for tortious interference, defamation, and attempted corporate sabotage. We will freeze his assets by noon and bury him so deep in legal fees he will never see the light of day. I will not tolerate some amateur scam artist threatening the integrity of this firm or my best employee. It was a generous offer. With Thomas backing me, Terrence would be absolutely annihilated within the week. But I shook my head, offering a polite but firm smile. I deeply appreciate the offer, Thomas, I said smoothly. And under normal circumstances, I would gladly let our legal team tear him to pieces. But corporate litigation is too clean. It is too clinical. If you sue him, he gets to play the victim. He will spin a narrative that a massive, evil accounting firm bullied his small startup into bankruptcy. He will cry to his investors, and he will cry to my family, painting himself as a tragic martyr. Thomas raised an eyebrow, genuinely intrigued by my refusal. What exactly are you proposing, Rebecca? I want to handle him myself, I answered, keeping my tone perfectly level and absolute. I have spent the last 24 hours setting up a financial guillotine. I am going to let him put his own head in the block. When his empire collapses, I do not want it to be because of a corporate lawsuit. I want him to know it was me. I want my sister and my mother to watch the exact moment their golden ticket turns to ash, and I want them to know they brought it entirely upon themselves. I just need you to reinstate my system access and give me 48 hours of personal leave to execute the final steps. Thomas stared at me for a long moment, a slow, approving smile spreading across his face. He recognized the exact same ruthless precision that made me his top forensic accountant. He turned to the HR director. David, reinstate Rebecca immediately. Clear her schedule for the rest of the week. And Rebecca, when you finally drop the hammer on this guy, I want a front row seat to the fallout. Thank you, Thomas, I said, standing up and smoothing my slacks. I promise you the resulting audit will be a masterpiece. I gathered my folders and turned toward the glass door. I felt a surge of absolute control. I had neutralized Terrence's best offensive move without breaking a sweat. He thought he could outmaneuver me in my own arena, but all he had done was secure his own destruction. Just as I reached for the brass handle of the conference room door, my personal cell phone vibrated violently in my pocket. It was not a standard text message chime. It was the loud, piercing emergency tone I had specifically assigned to my primary credit monitoring service. I pulled the phone out and looked at the screen. A bright red banner notification from Experian covered the display. Severe fraud alert. The notification read, "A hard credit inquiry has just been initiated using your social security number. An application for a $100,000 unsecured personal loan is currently being processed at a local Chase Bank branch." My blood ran cold for a fraction of a second, then immediately boiled over into pure, unadulterated rage. Terrence and Samantha were stupid, but they were not brave enough to walk into a bank and commit, in person, felony identity theft. There was only one person in my family entitled and delusional enough to try something like that: my mother. I grabbed my leather briefcase and practically sprinted out of the executive conference room. Thomas and David were still sitting at the mahogany table, but they did not try to stop me. They knew exactly what that alarm tone meant. The Experian notification on my phone contained the exact address of the Chase Bank branch where the fraudulent credit application was currently being processed. It was located just 4 blocks away, right in the heart of the financial district. I did not bother waiting for the executive elevator. I pushed through the heavy fire doors and flew down the 3 flights of stairs to the ground-level lobby. I burst through the revolving glass doors of my office building and power walked down the busy Chicago sidewalk. My mind was racing, calculating the sheer legal magnitude of what my mother was attempting to do. Identity theft is a severe federal crime under any circumstance, but walking into a federally insured bank branch to secure a $100,000 personal loan under someone else's name was a completely different level of insanity. Within 10 minutes, I was pulling open the heavy glass doors of the Chase Bank branch. The interior was sleek, modern, and relatively quiet for a Tuesday morning. The tellers were busy handling transactions with a few corporate clients, and the main lobby seating area was empty. I bypassed the standard waiting section and marched straight toward the row of private glass-walled offices reserved exclusively for branch managers and senior loan officers. I did not need to search for very long. Through the second glass partition, I saw her. My mother Brenda was sitting comfortably in a plush leather guest chair, casually sipping a complimentary cup of coffee. She was wearing her best pearl necklace and a pristine cashmere sweater, looking every bit the affluent, respectable matriarch of a wealthy family. Sitting across from her was a young, sharply dressed branch manager who was furiously typing data into his computer keyboard. I stepped closer to the glass partition and looked directly at the manager's desk. Spread out across the polished wood surface were several highly sensitive personal documents. I instantly recognized the faded yellow paper of my original birth certificate, my physical social security card from when I was a teenager, and a thick stack of my old tax returns that I had foolishly stored in my childhood bedroom closet many years ago. She had deliberately raided my old files. She had planned this desperate backup strategy the moment I cut off her stolen dividends at the steakhouse last night. I pushed the heavy glass door open and walked directly into the private office without knocking. "Excuse me," the young branch manager said, visibly startled by my sudden entrance. He stood up halfway from his chair, quickly adjusting his silk tie. "This is a private financial appointment. You cannot just walk in here unannounced. If you need assistance, please speak to the concierge at the front desk." "I am not here for account assistance," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "I am here to report an active felony in progress." Brenda slowly turned around in her expensive leather chair. When she saw me standing firmly in the doorway, she did not look guilty. She did not panic, and she certainly did not try to snatch the stolen documents off the desk. Instead, she rolled her eyes dramatically, let out a loud sigh of pure annoyance, and took another leisurely sip of her coffee. "Really? Rebecca?" My mother snapped, her tone dripping with absolute disdain. "You are tracking my movements now. You have no respect for family boundaries whatsoever. I am in the middle of a very important financial transaction. Wait out in the lobby until I am completely finished." I looked at the young manager, who was now staring back and forth between us, completely bewildered. Sir, I said, maintaining unwavering eye contact with him. My name is Rebecca. I am a licensed forensic accountant. The woman sitting casually across from you is my mother, Brenda, and she is currently using my stolen Social Security number to fraudulently apply for a $100,000 personal loan. The manager froze entirely, his hands hovering nervously over his keyboard. The color instantly drained from his face as he looked down at the birth certificate on his desk and then back up at me. Ma'am, he stammered nervously, addressing my mother. Is this true? Are you not the primary applicant for this line of credit? Brenda slammed her coffee cup down on the desk, spilling hot liquid onto the polished wood. She stood up abruptly, puffing her chest out indignantly. Do not listen to her, Brenda commanded the manager, waving her hand dismissively in my direction. My daughter is just being incredibly dramatic and selfish. Her sister Samantha is about to lose her beautiful home because of a minor mortgage issue, and this loan is going to save her property from foreclosure. The manager blinked in absolute shock. But ma'am, you cannot originate a personal loan using someone else's credentials. That is a severe violation of federal banking laws. Brenda scoffed loudly, completely oblivious to the massive legal gravity of her reckless actions. She crossed her arms and glared at the branch manager with absolute entitlement. Do not quote the law to me, young man, she sneered arrogantly. I gave birth to her. Her credit score belongs to me. Section 12. 800 words. The young branch manager sat frozen in his chair, completely paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of my mother's statement. I gave birth to her. Her credit score belongs to me. It was a sentence so profoundly delusional that it actually took a moment for the reality of the situation to register in the quiet office. I turned my attention back to the manager, maintaining a cold, authoritative posture. Sir, I said, making sure every syllable was perfectly articulated. Under federal law, what she is attempting to do right now is identity theft. I am the sole owner of that Social Security number. I have not authorized any line of credit, and I am formally instructing you to flag this application as fraudulent immediately. Furthermore, I want a hard copy of every single document she handed to you. The manager swallowed hard and immediately began rapidly typing on his keyboard. Yes, absolutely, ma'am, he stammered. I am canceling the application right now and placing a severe security lock on your credit profile. I will also notify our internal fraud department and summon building security to formally document the incident. Brenda finally realized that her master plan was collapsing. The arrogant smirk vanished from her face, replaced by a deep, ugly shade of crimson. You cannot do this, Rebecca, she shrieked, slamming her hands down on the manager's desk. Your sister needs this money today. The bank is going to take her house. You have millions sitting around, and you will let your own flesh and blood be thrown onto the street. I did not flinch. If Samantha is losing her house, she should ask her husband where the $50,000 he spent on his mistress went, I replied calmly. Now step away from the desk, mother. Brenda let out an ear-piercing scream of pure frustration. She snatched her designer purse off the floor and stormed out of the glass-enclosed office, bursting right into the center of the quiet bank lobby. I followed closely behind her as she began her theatrical performance. Look at her, Brenda yelled at the top of her lungs, spinning around to point an accusing finger directly at me. Every teller stopped counting cash. Every corporate client turned their head. The entire Chase Bank branch fell dead silent, staring at the manic woman in the cashmere sweater. Look at my sociopathic daughter, Brenda continued to scream, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. I gave her life, and now she is trying to have me arrested just because I wanted to help her younger sister survive. She is an ungrateful, malicious monster. Two large uniformed security guards quickly marched across the polished marble floor. Ma'am, you need to lower your voice and step away from the other customers, the taller guard commanded sternly. We have already contacted the local police precinct regarding a financial fraud incident in the manager's private office. Brenda ignored the guards completely. She stepped closer to me, her face contorted with absolute hatred. "You are going to die alone, Rebecca," she hissed venomously, making sure the entire lobby could hear her. "No man will ever want you. No child will ever love you. You will sit in your cold, empty condo with your spreadsheets until the day you die completely alone." A pair of Chicago police officers walked through the heavy glass front doors. The branch manager hurried out of his office, pointing directly at my mother. "That is the woman, officers," the manager stated nervously. "She provided stolen identification documents to secure a fraudulent loan." The officers approached Brenda, who suddenly realized she was about to be put in handcuffs. She took a step back, her aggressive posture crumbling into genuine panic. "Rebecca, tell them it was a misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Tell them I had your permission. Please, Rebecca." I looked at the officers. They were waiting for my official statement to proceed with the arrest. I looked back at my mother, watching her tremble under the weight of her own reckless actions. Sending her to a holding cell today would be incredibly satisfying, but it would disrupt the final phase of my plan. I needed her free to witness the absolute destruction of Terrence's empire. "Officers," I said smoothly, stepping between them and my mother, "I am declining to press criminal charges today. This is a severe family dispute, and I will be handling the financial repercussions privately." The officers exchanged a skeptical look, but nodded, instructing the security guards to formally escort her off the premises. As the guards stepped forward to grab her arms, I leaned in close to my mother's ear. She was shaking violently, terrified of my coldness. "Enjoy your house for the next 48 hours, I whispered very softly. I stepped out of the Chase Bank lobby and back onto the bustling Chicago sidewalk. The cool afternoon wind felt incredibly refreshing against my face. I left my mother standing near the entrance, surrounded by suspicious security guards, completely stripped of her dignity and her delusional sense of entitlement. She would not be trying to steal my identity again anytime soon. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of a highly effective private process server I frequently utilized for my corporate fraud investigations. A man named Gregory, who was known for his absolute punctuality and his complete disregard for social etiquette when serving legal documents. Gregory answered on the second ring. "I need an immediate priority delivery to a residential address in the northern suburbs," I instructed him, walking briskly back toward my firm to gather my personal laptop. "I have a massive stack of financial documents that need to be handed directly to the homeowner in front of as many witnesses as possible." "Can you be there in exactly 2 hours?" Gregory confirmed the assignment. I smiled and ended the call. While my mother was failing miserably at the bank, my sister Samantha was busy running her own pathetic damage control campaign. After the humiliating disaster at the steakhouse and the devastating revelation of Terrence funding a Miami sugar baby, Samantha should have been packing her bags or contacting a divorce attorney. But my sister was entirely consumed by the superficial image she had carefully crafted on social media. Admitting defeat or acknowledging her crumbling marriage was simply not an option for her. Instead, she decided to double down on the grand illusion of her perfect life. According to the constant updates on her Instagram story, Samantha was currently hosting a lavish women in business networking brunch at her sprawling suburban mansion. She had hired a private catering company to serve artisanal pastries and expensive mimosas on her perfectly manicured back patio. About 30 affluent suburban wives and local female entrepreneurs were gathered around the swimming pool wearing designer sundresses and discussing their non-existent investment portfolios. Samantha was standing at the head of a long, floral-decorated table holding a crystal champagne flute. She was smiling brightly, laughing with her wealthy friends, completely pretending that her husband was not drowning in debt to violent loan sharks and cheating on her with a 22-year-old. She was desperately trying to secure her social standing before the rumors of their financial collapse could spread through the neighborhood. I sat at my kitchen island, monitoring the live location of Gregory the process server via a secure tracking link on my phone. He pulled into Samantha's gated driveway right on schedule. I took a slow sip of my coffee, genuinely wishing I could be there in person to watch the facade shatter. But having an impartial third party deliver the absolute destruction was much more legally sound. Gregory did not bother ringing the front doorbell and waiting politely for a maid to answer. He walked straight around the side of the sprawling brick house, pushed open the wrought iron gate, and marched directly onto the crowded back patio. The lively chatter of 30 affluent women slowly died down as the tall, imposing man in a cheap windbreaker strode right past the catered buffet table. Samantha froze mid-laugh, her champagne flute hovering near her lips. She stared at Gregory with a mixture of profound confusion and rising panic. "Excuse me," Samantha snapped quickly, trying to regain her authoritative posture in front of her elite social circle. "Who are you?" "You are trespassing on private property. The catering staff is supposed to use the side entrance." Gregory stopped right in front of her, completely unfazed by her sharp tone or the audience of wealthy women staring at him. "Are you Samantha?" he asked in a loud, booming voice that echoed clearly across the swimming pool. "Yes, I am," she answered defensively, her perfectly contoured face tightening with anxiety. "But I demand to know who let you back here." Gregory reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a massive 2-inch thick stack of legal documents bound by heavy rubber bands. He slammed the heavy stack directly onto the floral centerpiece of the dining table, right next to Samantha's expensive champagne. "You have been served," Gregory announced loudly. Samantha dropped her glass. It shattered against the stone patio, spilling champagne everywhere. Several women gasped, stepping back from the table. Samantha stared at the towering stack of papers, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she reached out to read the bold black lettering on the very top page. It was not just a standard civil lawsuit. The first document was a formal notice of immediate foreclosure from my private asset management company. And right beneath it was a severe certified audit notification from the Internal Revenue Service demanding immediate payment and threatening criminal tax evasion charges for 5 years of completely unpaid federal taxes. Samantha stared at the bold black letters, all the color instantly draining from her perfectly contoured face. The lively chatter on the back patio died abruptly. The silence was deafening, broken only by the whispers of the 30 affluent women who had just witnessed the absolute destruction of her carefully curated social standing. Within 60 seconds, the women began making awkward, hasty excuses. They grabbed their designer purses and rushed toward the side gate, eager to distance themselves from a toxic, radioactive financial disaster. Samantha did not even try to stop them. She collapsed into a wrought iron patio chair, her hands shaking violently as she frantically dialed Terrence. I knew exactly how Terrence would react to the devastating news. A logical, rational man would immediately hire a bankruptcy attorney and prepare to surrender his assets. But Terrence was a chronic narcissist running a failing Ponzi scheme. When a scam artist is pushed to the absolute edge of a cliff, they do not surrender to the authorities. They double down on the delusion. He needed hundreds of thousands of dollars immediately to pay off his violent loan sharks, stall the federal tax auditors, and stop the foreclosure of his suburban mansion. By Wednesday evening, my tracking software alerted me to a massive, desperate expenditure on one of Terrence's few remaining active corporate credit cards. He had just dropped $25,000 to secure the grand ballroom at a premier downtown Chicago hotel for Friday night. He was advertising it across social media as an exclusive invitation-only venture capital gala for Apex Digital Ventures. It was a classic, transparent Hail Mary play. He was planning to pack a room with wealthy, unsuspecting investors, dazzle them with fake blockchain projections, and secure enough initial cash deposits to save his own life. It was the perfect stage for his final act. And I was going to be the main event. Friday night arrived with a crisp, cool breeze sweeping off Lake Michigan. I spent the entire afternoon preparing for the confrontation. For the past 6 years, I had deliberately dressed in conservative, muted corporate suits, hiding my substantial wealth behind a modest exterior to appease my family's fragile egos. Tonight, I was permanently leaving the forensic accountant uniform in the closet. I visited an exclusive boutique on the Magnificent Mile and purchased a floor-length emerald green designer silk gown that fit me perfectly. I had my hair professionally styled and wore a pair of stunning diamond drop earrings I had bought for myself years ago, but never dared to wear around my mother or sister. I looked at my reflection in my hallway mirror before leaving my luxury condo. I did not look like the family scapegoat. I did not look like the bitter, lonely spinster they desperately wanted me to be. I looked like a powerful woman who held the absolute authority to destroy an empire, and in my hand, I held the weapon. A sleek silver flash drive containing 300 pages of irrefutable, heavily documented financial ruin. I arrived at the luxury hotel just after 8 o'clock. The grand lobby was bustling with elegantly dressed guests and tourists. I bypassed the main concierge desk and walked gracefully toward the sweeping marble staircase leading up to the grand ballroom. At the top of the stairs, two private security guards hired by Terrence stood firmly behind a red velvet rope, meticulously checking names off a digital tablet. I did not slow my pace. I walked straight up to the taller guard, projecting absolute, unquestionable authority. "I am Rebecca, the primary institutional creditor for Apex Digital Ventures," I said smoothly, looking him dead in the eye. "I am expected inside." The guard glanced at my expensive emerald gown, the sparkling diamonds, and my unwavering confidence. He did not even bother checking the digital guest list. He quickly unhooked the velvet rope and nodded respectfully. "Go right ahead, ma'am." I stepped through the heavy gilded double doors and walked directly into the grand ballroom. The space was enormous, dripping with crystal chandeliers and lined with sleek digital screens projecting completely fake upward trending crypto charts. Waitstaff circled the crowded room with silver trays, carrying glasses of champagne. Terrence had successfully managed to lure in over 100 potential investors, mostly local business owners and affluent professionals, all dressed in formal attire and eagerly whispering about the next big digital currency boom. Samantha was standing near the center of the room, wearing a desperate frozen smile as she tried to play the role of the successful founder's wife. She looked completely exhausted, her eyes darting nervously around the crowd. Terrence was up on a raised stage at the front of the ballroom, holding a wireless microphone. He was mid-sentence, charming the audience with his charismatic smile and practiced lies about guaranteed quarterly returns. I stood at the back of the room for a brief moment, letting the heavy doors click shut behind me. I tightened my grip on the silver flash drive, lifted my chin, and began to walk straight down the center aisle. The sharp click of my heels against the polished hardwood floor cut through the murmur of the ballroom. As I moved down the center aisle, the crowd of investors parted their eyes, drawn to my emerald green gown and the absolute conviction in my stride. On the raised stage, Terrence paced, gesturing wildly toward the screen displaying fabricated crypto charts. He was mid-pitch, promising guaranteed quarterly returns, when his gaze locked onto mine. His charismatic smile instantly vanished. His voice faltered, the microphone picking up a sharp, panicked intake of breath. He stumbled over his words, his eyes widening in terror as he realized who had crashed his final performance. He knew exactly why I was there. Samantha, standing near the front row clutching champagne, turned to see what distracted her husband. When she saw me, her jaw dropped. She stepped backward, frantically bumping into an investor. "Security!" Terrence shouted, his voice cracking over the sound system. He pointed a trembling finger at me, abandoning his professional persona. "Get her out of here. She is a corporate spy. She is trying to sabotage me. Remove her from the premises immediately." Two men in dark suits immediately stepped out from the shadows near the stage, moving aggressively to intercept me. They reached out to grab my arms, expecting a struggle. I did not break my stride. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of fear. I simply stopped, looked the larger security guard dead in the eye, and spoke with absolute icy authority. "If you touch me, I will have you both arrested for assault by the end of the hour," I stated calmly, ensuring my voice carried to the investors. "I am a forensic accountant and the primary institutional creditor of Apex Digital Ventures. I am here to execute a legal audit. Step aside." The absolute confidence in my tone and the mention of legal audits made the guards hesitate. They exchanged an uncertain look, hands dropping. In the high-stakes corporate world, security teams know better than to physically assault a legitimate financial auditor in front of a room full of wealthy witnesses. Terrence realized his hired muscle was failing. He dropped his microphone on the podium and physically lunged toward the edge of the stage, his face contorted with panic. "Shut down the AV system," Terrence screamed toward the back of the room, waving his arms frantically. "Cut the power to the microphones! Cut the projectors!" But his desperate orders fell on completely deaf ears. I had anticipated his panic. 2 hours before the gala began, I visited the hotel audiovisual control booth. I had a very brief, highly lucrative conversation with the lead technician. I handed him $5,000 in crisp cash and a sleek silver flash drive, instructing him to ignore any orders from Terrence and to wait for my specific signal. I reached the front of the room, smoothly bypassing the paralyzed security guards, and climbed the 3 short steps onto the main stage. Terrence tried to block my path, puffing out his chest to physically intimidate me, just like he had done in my condo earlier that week. "Get out of here, Rebecca," Terrence hissed under his breath, his eyes wild with desperation. "I will give you whatever you want. I will pay you double. Just walk away right now." I smiled warmly at him, a smile that did not reach my eyes. "You have absolutely nothing left to give Terrence," I whispered back. I gracefully sidestepped his rigid frame and walked directly to the main podium. I picked up the microphone he had hastily abandoned. I tapped the metal grill twice. The sharp thumping sound echoed perfectly through the silent, captivated ballroom. Every single investor in the room was staring at me, waiting to see what the woman in the emerald gown had to say. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice steady, clear, and ringing with absolute authority. "My name is Rebecca. I am a licensed forensic investigator. You have been invited here tonight to invest your hard-earned money into Apex Digital Ventures. But before you write a single check, I believe you should review the actual financial ledgers of the man standing on this stage." I looked to the back of the room and gave a subtle nod to the AV technician. The technician pressed a single button. The massive digital screen behind Terrence flickered. The fake upward trending crypto charts instantly vanished. In their place, a high-resolution, unedited projection of Terrence's actual verified corporate banking statements illuminated the entire ballroom. The collective gasp from the crowd was deafening. Flashing in bold, bright red numbers across the 50-foot screen was his true account balance: negative $2.4 million. The sheer magnitude of that red number hung suspended over the grand ballroom like a guillotine. For a fleeting second, the affluent crowd of investors simply stared, their minds struggling to process the massive discrepancy between the glamorous crypto pitch they had just heard and the brutal financial reality projected on the 50-foot screen. The projection was incredibly detailed, showing not just the negative balance, but the aggressive overdraft fees and severe delinquency warnings from multiple financial institutions. Then the whispers began. Low, frantic murmurs rippled through the audience as men in tailored suits and women in evening gowns pointed at the staggering deficit. Terrence practically threw himself at the podium, his hands scrambling desperately over the audio console, trying to find a switch to kill the feed. He desperately pounded his fists against the wooden surface, his expensive designer suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. "This is a hack," he screamed, his voice cracking without the microphone echoing weakly across the massive room. "It is a fabricated projection. Do not look at that screen. My company is highly solvent." I stepped to the side of the stage, firmly holding my microphone. I pressed a button on the small remote I had acquired from the AV technician. The screen transitioned to a new slide. It was a highly detailed line-by-line breakdown of the Apex Digital Ventures primary operating account. "There is no hack, Terrence," I announced, my voice booming through the surround sound speakers, instantly drowning out his pathetic excuses. "I am a forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud. I spend my days dismantling complex financial illusions built by people much smarter than you." And there is no cryptocurrency portfolio here. Ladies and gentlemen, you are not looking at a venture capital firm. You are looking at a classic, extremely poorly executed Ponzi scheme. The murmurs in the crowd morphed into alarmed shouts. Several investors pushed their way toward the front of the stage, their faces flushed with rising anger. I paced slowly across the stage, owning the space entirely. For the past 12 months, Terrence has been utilizing a very simple, highly illegal strategy, I explained, pointing directly at the massive projection. He takes initial cash deposits from new investors like you, promises a guaranteed quarterly yield, and then uses your money to pay off the older investors who are demanding to cash out. There are no digital ledgers. There are no offshore blockchain expansion projects. Your hard-earned money went directly into his personal checking account. I clicked the remote again. The screen flashed a collage of high-definition receipts, wire transfers, and luxury retail invoices. Let us review exactly where your venture capital is currently sitting, I said, my tone turning sharp and clinical. I looked down at the front row, locking eyes with my sister. Samantha was trembling violently, her face pale as a ghost, clutching a bright orange designer purse to her chest. That limited edition Hermes Birkin bag my sister is currently holding, I asked, gesturing clearly towards Samantha. It cost $28,000. It was purchased exactly 48 hours after Mr. Harrison, the gentleman sitting in the third row, wired his $50,000 retirement contribution to Apex Digital Ventures. Your retirement savings are currently sitting on her arm, Mr. Harrison. An older man in the third row let out a furious shout, his face turning purple as he glared at Samantha. Samantha let out a whimpering sob and dropped the expensive leather bag onto the hardwood floor as if it had suddenly caught fire. But he did not just spend your money on his wife, I continued, ruthlessly, clicking to the next slide. Here we have a series of wire transfers dating back over the last 6 months, totaling well over $80,000. These funds were sent directly to a 22-year-old woman in Miami, Florida, operating under the online alias Sugar Baby Mia. We also have records of first-class flights to the Bahamas, luxury hotel suites, and high-end jewelry purchases. Terrence has been using your investment capital to finance his mistresses. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The thin veneer of high society elegance completely shattered. The investors realized in real time that their life savings, their children's college funds, and their business loans had been squandered on designer handbags and sugar babies. "Give me my money back," a man in a tuxedo roared, throwing his crystal champagne glass violently to the floor. It shattered into 100 pieces, breaking the last ounce of restraint in the room. "You scam artist!" a woman screamed, pushing past a frozen security guard. "I will completely destroy you." Dozens of angry investors began surging toward the stage, shouting obscenities, demanding their money, and pulling out their cell phones to dial the authorities. The collective fury of 100 financially ruined people was a terrifying force to witness. Terrence was trapped. His grand illusion was dead. His reputation was incinerated. He looked out at the furious mob charging the stage, then turned around and looked at me. His eyes were wide, completely bloodshot, and entirely unhinged. He had nothing left to lose, and his narcissistic brain could only process one thought. I was the one who pulled the trigger. With a feral, guttural scream of pure rage, Terrence lowered his shoulder and lunged directly at me. He moved with the blind, reckless momentum of a man whose entire world had just collapsed. His hands were curled into tight fists, his face twisted in a mask of pure hatred. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. Before his expensive leather shoes could even hit the second step of the stage, two massive figures in perfectly tailored dark suits materialized from the front row. I had not come to a room full of volatile, defrauded investors without my own insurance policy. The two men were highly trained private security contractors I had hired specifically for this evening. The contractor on the left caught Terrence by the shoulders, using his own forward momentum against him, while the contractor on the right swept his legs with brutal efficiency. Terrence hit the polished hardwood floor of the stage with a sickening thud. The breath left his lungs in a loud, ragged gasp that was picked up by the microphone. The security guard swiftly pinned his arms securely behind his back, pressing his cheek hard against the floorboards. He thrashed like a wild animal, kicking his legs and swearing violently, but he was completely immobilized. Seeing her husband physically pinned to the floor, Samantha finally snapped out of her paralyzed state of shock. She abandoned her ruined designer bag, gathered the heavy silk fabric of her dress, and scrambled up the stage stairs. She completely ignored the furious crowd of investors screaming behind her. "Let him go!" Samantha shrieked, batting her manicured hands uselessly against the broad shoulders of my security team. "You cannot treat us like this. We are wealthy. We have high-powered attorneys who will destroy you." When the guards ignored her, she turned her venomous gaze entirely on me. Her face was streaked with running mascara, her perfect blowout completely ruined by her manic movements. "You think you have won, Rebecca?" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysterical arrogance. "You think you can just embarrass us in front of the entire city and take our money? You are a pathetic, jealous spinster who knows absolutely nothing about how real wealth operates." Samantha stepped to the absolute edge of the stage, pointing a shaking finger at the furious crowd of investors below. "Listen to me, all of you!" she yelled desperately, trying to drown out their angry demands. "You can scream and threaten us all you want, but you are not getting a single dime back from my husband. Terrence is a protected corporate entity. We will simply file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy tomorrow morning. The corporate veil will protect our personal assets. You can sue his digital startup into oblivion, but you cannot touch us personally." She turned back to me, a desperate, manic smile stretching across her face. She was clinging to her delusion like a life raft. "And you certainly cannot touch our house, Rebecca," she spat proudly. "Our mansion is held in a secure family trust. Under state asset protection laws, our primary residence is completely shielded from corporate creditors. Terrence made sure of it. We will wipe this debt clean, we will keep our beautiful home, and we will start over. And you will still be a miserable, lonely accountant with no one to love you." I stood calmly behind the wooden podium, listening to her desperate, unhinged lecture on bankruptcy law. When she finally finished her rant, the ballroom was vibrating with the sheer explosive outrage of the defrauded investors. I looked at my sister's triumphant, tear-stained face, and then I did something I had not done all evening. I laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a cold, echoing laugh of pure, unadulterated amusement that rang through the microphone and instantly silenced the front row of the screaming crowd. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Samantha," I said, leaning casually against the podium. "When a corporation files for bankruptcy, the personal assets of the founders are often shielded. And primary residences can indeed be protected from standard unsecured corporate creditors. It is a very common legal strategy for failing entrepreneurs. But there is a massive fatal flaw in your grand escape plan." I looked toward the back of the ballroom and gave the audiovisual technician one final nod. The massive digital screen behind me flickered. The devastating bank ledger disappeared instantly, replaced by a high-resolution scan of a highly complex legal document. It was a property deed complete with official county clerk seals and notarized signatures. "I am not an unsecured creditor," I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy tension in the room like a scalpel. "2 weeks ago, your husband missed his third consecutive mortgage payment to that predatory subprime lender. The bank was aggressively preparing to auction your loan off to the highest bidder to recoup their losses. Subprime lenders hate holding toxic debt, so I swooped in and bought it for pennies on the dollar using liquid cash." I pointed a manicured finger at the massive projection. "If you look closely at the primary lien holder on the deed to your sprawling suburban mansion, it does not list a major national bank. It lists a private holding company called RB Holdings, LLC. That is a shell corporation entirely funded and controlled by me. I own your toxic debt, Samantha. I am your primary secured creditor. I am your landlord." And I am evicting you. The words echoed through the silent ballroom, hanging in the air with the weight of absolute finality. Samantha stared up at the massive projection of the property deed, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish pulled from the water. Her eyes darted frantically across the legal jargon, searching desperately for a loophole, a typo, or any sign that this was just another elaborate bluff. But there was no mistake. The official seal of the county clerk was glaringly visible, and right next to it was the registered name of my private holding company. "No," Samantha finally whispered, shaking her head violently, causing her ruined hair to whip across her tear-stained face. "No, you cannot do this. You are my sister. You cannot just buy my house and kick me out onto the street." "I did not just buy your house, Samantha," I corrected her, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. "I bought your debt. When you and your husband decided to live a multimillionaire lifestyle on a fraudulently acquired budget, you signed a contract with a predatory lender. That contract explicitly stated that if you defaulted for 90 days, the lender had the right to sell the note to a third-party collection agency. I simply created an agency, submitted a lucrative cash offer, and legally assumed your mortgage." Terrence groaned from the floor, struggling weakly against the firm grip of my security contractors. "You are insane," he spat, his face pressed uncomfortably against the stage floorboards. "You spent your own money just to ruin us." "It was a highly strategic investment, Terrence," I replied, looking down at him with utter disdain. "You see, an unsecured corporate creditor would have to wait years in a messy bankruptcy court to recover pennies on the dollar. But a secured creditor holding the primary mortgage deed, I do not have to wait for a judge to sort through your crypto scam. I hold the absolute legal right to seize the physical asset to satisfy the delinquent debt. And since you completely ignored the foreclosure notices my process server delivered to your little brunch party this afternoon, the grace period is officially over." Samantha let out a loud, agonizing wail. She fell to her knees right there on the stage, the expensive silk of her designer dress pooling around her. All the arrogant entitlement she had carried for 31 years completely evaporated. The golden child who had spent her entire life being pampered, praised and protected from the consequences of her own actions was finally facing reality. "Please, Rebecca." Samantha begged, clasping her hands together in front of her chest. "I will do anything. I will get a job. We will pay you rent. Just do not take my home. Where am I supposed to go?" I looked at her, feeling absolutely no pity. I thought back to the steakhouse when she sat there dripping in diamonds and told me how empty and pathetic my life was. I thought about the forged legal document they tried to use to extort my home equity. "You can go stay with Mother," I suggested coldly. Although, considering she tried to commit felony identity theft at a Chase Bank branch this morning to pay for your mortgage, she might be needing a new place to live very soon as well. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the audience of investors. They were no longer just angry victims of a financial scam. They were captivated witnesses to a brutal, methodical family execution. The older investor from the third row, Mr. Harrison, stepped forward. He looked at me, then pointed down at Terrence. "So what happens to our money?" he demanded, his voice rough with anger. "You own his house, but this scam artist still stole our retirement funds. We want him behind bars." I turned my attention to Mr. Harrison and the restless crowd. "Do not worry," I assured them, raising the microphone so my voice carried clearly to the back of the room. "I did not just come here tonight to settle a personal real estate dispute. I told you I am a forensic accountant. When I discovered the massive irregularities in the Apex Digital Ventures operating accounts, I did not just bring the evidence to this gala. As a licensed financial professional, I have a strict legal obligation to report severe financial crimes to the proper federal authorities." Terrence froze completely. The thrashing stopped. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a new, much deeper level of sheer terror. "Federal authorities," he choked out, his voice barely a whisper. I raised my left wrist and casually checked the face of my watch. "Right on time," I said. At that exact second, The heavy gilded double doors at the back of the grand ballroom were violently kicked open. 10 agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers with FBI printed in bright yellow across their backs swarmed into the grand ballroom. They moved with synchronized precision, flanked by Chicago police officers who immediately secured every available exit. The deafening outrage of the investors instantly transformed into a stunned silence as the agents quickly fanned out across the luxurious space. The investors realized their money was gone, but they were about to witness a spectacular execution of justice. It was the complete obliteration of a man who believed he was untouchable. I stepped back from the wooden podium, allowing the lead agent to approach the stage. I spent my entire leave compiling a flawless 300-page forensic audit of Apex Digital Ventures. I tracked every fraudulent wire transfer, fake crypto hash, and stolen retirement contribution. Yesterday morning, I handed that dossier directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission, who immediately expedited it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Federal prosecutors do not waste time when handed a perfectly irrefutable wire fraud case on a silver platter. They move with devastating speed to prevent the destruction of evidence and the flight of the primary suspect. Terrence stared at the approaching federal agents with wide, bloodshot eyes. The terrifying reality of a massive federal indictment finally pierced through his thick, narcissistic delusion. My private security contractors instantly recognized the federal authority and wisely stepped back, releasing their firm grip on Terrence to avoid interfering with an active arrest. The moment his arms were completely free, pure animal survival instinct took over his rational thoughts. Terrence scrambled to his feet, his expensive leather shoes slipping wildly on the polished hardwood floor of the stage. He did not look back at his wife. He did not attempt to offer a final apology to the crowd of financially ruined investors watching his humiliating downfall. He simply turned and sprinted desperately toward the side of the stage, aiming blindly for the narrow service corridor located near the catering kitchen. He thought he could somehow outrun the absolute certainty of a federal prison sentence. He barely made it 5 feet. 2 federal agents waiting strategically at the bottom of the side stairs lunged forward to intercept him. The taller agent grabbed Terrence by the lapels of his custom-tailored suit, expertly using his own frantic momentum to spin him around completely. With a swift, tactical maneuver, the agent slammed him forcefully face first into the solid hardwood floor. The loud, sickening sound of his heavy impact echoed sharply through the entirely silent ballroom. Terrence let out a pathetic, breathless groan as the agents pressed a knee into his spine and pinned his arms firmly behind his back. The sharp, unmistakable metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists signaled the absolute, irreversible end of his fraudulent digital empire. The grand illusion he had spent years constructing was finally dismantled in front of the exact people he had intended to completely rob. The federal agents hauled Terrence roughly to his feet. His expensive suit jacket was torn at the shoulder. His face was bruised and swelling rapidly, and his confident, charismatic venture capitalist persona was entirely eradicated. He looked like the desperate, pathetic criminal he truly was. There was absolutely no trace of the arrogant man who had mocked my career at the steakhouse days ago. His pride was gone. As the lead agent loudly began to read him his Miranda rights, Terrence desperately scanned the stage and locked eyes with Samantha. She was still kneeling on the stage floor, her hands covering her mouth, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic nightmare unfolding around her. Her luxurious life was vanishing right before her eyes, but the worst betrayal was still yet to come. "Samantha, you have to tell them!" Terrence screamed over the authoritative voice of the arresting officer, his tone cracking with pure, desperate cowardice. "Tell them you were the one in charge of the corporate banking." Samantha blinked slowly, lowering her trembling hands from her pale face. She stared at her handcuffed husband in absolute, uncomprehending horror. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the stunned crowd. "Your name is on all the operating agreements," Terrence shouted frantically, violently, fighting against the firm grip of the 2 federal agents holding his arms. I made you the primary director of the limited liability companies 6 months ago. The offshore shell accounts in the Cayman Islands are legally registered under your social security number. Tell them it was your entire idea. Tell them I was just a hired consultant following your direct orders. You are my wife, Samantha. You promised to always support me. You have to take the fall for this right now. The absolute silence that followed Terrence's desperate command was heavy and suffocating. Samantha remained frozen on the hardwood floor of the stage, her tear-streaked face locked in an expression of pure horror. The man she had endlessly defended, the man whose fake wealth she had paraded around her affluent suburban neighborhood, was openly offering her up to the federal government like a sacrificial lamb. He was completely willing to let his own wife rot in a federal penitentiary just to shave a few years off his own sentence. The defrauded investors gasped in absolute disgust. They had just watched a man steal their life savings, but seeing him betray his crying wife on a public stage was a new level of depravity. The lead FBI agent, a tall man with a stern expression, turned his attention away from the thrashing Terrence and looked directly at Samantha. He reached into his tactical jacket and pulled out a heavily redacted legal folder. "Is your name Samantha, the federal agent?" asked his voice entirely devoid of warmth. "Are you the legally registered primary director of Apex Digital Ventures and its associated offshore holding companies in the Cayman Islands?" Samantha could not speak. Her throat bobbed frantically as she tried to swallow, but no sound came out. She looked at the federal agent, then at the furious crowd watching her with absolute contempt. The devastating reality of her situation finally pierced through her lifelong bubble of privilege. She was not just losing her sprawling brick mansion. She was not just losing her luxury cars, her expensive designer wardrobe, and her elite country club membership. She was facing decades in a maximum security federal prison for severe wire fraud, tax evasion, and operating a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Terrence was aggressively yanked to his feet by the arresting officers. "I was just the marketing consultant," Terrence yelled out frantically to the agents as they began to drag him toward the service exit. "She signed every single one of the bank transfers. She is the one who bought the luxury bags and tropical vacations. It was her company. It was all her idea." As the heavy double doors slammed shut behind her arrested husband, Samantha completely shattered. The golden child facade dissolved into a pathetic puddle of absolute panic. She let out a guttural, agonizing sob and scrambled across the polished floorboards of the stage. She did not care about her expensive silk couture dress tearing against the rough wood. She did not care that over 100 furious investors were watching her complete humiliation. She crawled directly toward me and threw her trembling arms around my knees, burying her wet face in the fabric of my emerald green gown. "Rebecca, please," Samantha wailed loudly, her voice thick with tears and absolute terror. "You have to stop this immediately. You have to tell them I did not know anything about the stolen money. I am your little sister. I do not know how to run a business. I just signed the legal papers Terrence put in front of me. I thought we were really rich. I did not know he was stealing from these innocent people." I looked down at the top of her ruined blonde hair. I felt the desperate, frantic grip of her manicured hands clutching my legs. For 31 years, my mother had forced me to protect her. I was expected to shield her from the consequences of every bad grade, every crashed car, and every maxed-out credit card. She had spent her entire adult life mocking my career, laughing at my single status, and treating me like a pathetic automated teller machine. And now, facing the cold steel bars of a federal cell, she was begging for her big sister to save her one last time. "Please, Rebecca," Samantha begged, looking up at me with thick black mascara running down her flushed cheeks. "You are a forensic accountant. You know exactly how to fix the financial ledgers. You can talk to the FBI agents. You can tell them it was all a terrible mistake. I will do anything you want. I will give you the big house. I will give you absolutely everything. Just please make it go away. Do not let them put me in prison. We are family. You have to save me." I did not reach down to comfort her. I did not offer her a single shred of reassurance. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman who had happily spent my stolen money to fund her glamorous illusion. I thought about the cruel, arrogant smirk on her face when she flashed her diamond ring at the restaurant. I reached down and firmly peeled her hands off my dress. I stepped back, severing the physical contact entirely. "Where is your husband and kids, Samantha?" I asked, my voice cold, sharp, and ringing with absolute finality. "Oh, right. One is in handcuffs and the other you never had time for because you were too busy spending my money." I turned my back on her kneeling figure and walked gracefully off the stage. I did not look over my shoulder as I exited the grand ballroom, leaving my sister sobbing on the floor while the federal agents hauled her fraudulent husband away in handcuffs. The cool night air felt incredibly refreshing as I stepped out of the hotel. I drove back to my downtown condo, poured myself a single glass of expensive red wine, and slept better than I had in 6 entire years. The next morning, the sun rose brightly over the Chicago skyline. I was up at 6 o'clock, dressed in a sharp-tailored black suit. I had a very important appointment in the northern suburbs. When you hold the primary mortgage note on a property, and the debtors ignore a formal legally binding notice of foreclosure, the eviction process can be executed with devastating speed. This is especially true when the property in question is directly tied to an active, massive federal fraud investigation. I drove my reliable 5-year-old Honda out to the sprawling suburban neighborhood and parked neatly across the street from the massive brick mansion. The scene playing out on the manicured front lawn was a masterpiece of poetic justice. 2 county sheriff cruisers were parked diagonally across the wide concrete driveway, their lights flashing silently in the crisp morning air. The heavy custom wooden front doors of the mansion were propped wide open. I walked slowly up the driveway, my heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement. Inside the grand foyer, the house was in a state of absolute frantic chaos. Samantha was running wildly down the sweeping curved staircase. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was a tangled, greasy mess. She was wearing a stained gray tracksuit, a stark and pathetic contrast to the glamorous emerald silk and sparkling diamonds she had tried to flaunt the night before. Because Terrence was currently sitting in a federal holding cell, and the government had immediately frozen every single one of their bank accounts, Samantha had absolutely zero access to any funds. She could not hire a professional moving company, she could not rent a storage unit, she could not even afford to buy proper cardboard moving boxes. Instead, she was clutching a fistful of heavy-duty black plastic garbage bags. The sheriff deputies standing in the hallway had given her exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises entirely. I stood quietly in the doorway, watching my sister violently shove thousands of dollars worth of designer silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, and imported leather shoes into the cheap plastic trash bags. She was hyperventilating, tears streaming down her red, puffy face as she dragged the heavy bags across the expensive hardwood floors she no longer owned. She looked up and saw me standing there. She dropped a bag full of Prada heels, the plastic tearing slightly against the floorboards. "Are you happy now?" Samantha screamed, her voice completely hoarse and broken from crying all night long. "My husband is locked in a federal prison. I have absolutely no money. I have nowhere to go. You ruined my entire life." I did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. "You ruined your own life, Samantha," I reminded her, my voice perfectly calm and completely detached. "You could have gotten a real job. You could have lived within your means. Instead, you chose to fund a ridiculous illusion with stolen money and treat me like garbage. You have exactly 15 minutes left before the deputies forcibly escort you off my property." Right on cue, 2 professional contractors I had hired walked right past us carrying heavy metal toolboxes. They immediately went to the front double doors and began aggressively drilling out the expensive brass locks. The loud grinding sound of the power tools echoed through the empty foyer, signaling the absolute end of her reign. Samantha covered her ears, weeping bitterly as she dragged her trash bags out onto the front lawn. Just as she hauled her final black plastic bag down the concrete steps, a yellow city taxicab abruptly pulled into the driveway, stopping right behind the police cruisers. The back door swung open, and my mother stepped out. Brenda was dragging two massive, incredibly heavy vintage leather suitcases behind her. She looked completely exhausted, her usual arrogant posture totally defeated. Without the $8,000 monthly dividend, she had grown so accustomed to stealing from me, her financial reality had caught up with her overnight. Combined with the severe security lock I placed on my credit profile after her failed identity theft attempt at the bank, her furious landlord had shown her absolutely zero mercy. She had been promptly locked out of her own luxury rental apartment early this morning. Brenda marched heavily up the driveway, expecting to find safe sanctuary in her golden child's beautiful suburban mansion. She took one look at Samantha sitting defeated on the damp grass next to a pile of garbage bags. Then she looked up at the grand entryway. She saw the armed county sheriffs. She saw the contractors installing brand new heavy steel deadbolts. And finally, she saw me standing proudly on the front porch holding the shiny new set of brass keys. Brenda stood frozen at the bottom of the driveway, staring at the shiny brass keys dangling from my fingers. The heavy vintage leather suitcases slipped from her grasp, hitting the concrete with a dull thud. For a long moment, the only sounds were the whir of the contractor's power drill echoing from the foyer and Samantha's pathetic, muffled sobs from the damp grass. My mother looked at the county sheriffs, then at her ruined golden child, and finally back at me. I could see the gears turning frantically in her head. Her primary survival strategy had always been manipulation, and right now she needed a new host. Brenda completely ignored Samantha. She stepped right over a black plastic garbage bag spilling with designer shoes and walked up the concrete steps toward the front porch. As she approached me, her rigid, arrogant posture collapsed. She hunched her shoulders, letting her face crumble into a mask of absolute tragedy. The tears began to flow instantly, large drops rolling down her cheeks as she clasped her hands together in front of her chest. "Rebecca, thank God you are here," Brenda cried, her voice quivering with perfectly calibrated fragility. "It has been an absolute nightmare. My landlord is a complete monster. He locked me out of my apartment this morning without any warning, and it is all because of that terrible misunderstanding at the bank yesterday. My credit is ruined, I have nowhere to sleep, and I am completely terrified. I came here hoping Terrence and Samantha could take me in, but clearly they have brought this disaster upon themselves." She paused, dabbing her eyes with the sleeve of her cashmere sweater, waiting for me to offer comfort. When I remained completely silent, she pushed forward with her ultimate demand. "You own this massive estate now, Rebecca." Brenda continued, gesturing widely to the sprawling brick mansion behind me. "There are 6 bedrooms in this house. I can take the master suite on the ground floor. Or if you plan to sell this property, you can simply buy me a luxury condo downtown. A 2-bedroom unit in a secure building would be perfect. I am your mother. You have millions of dollars and a moral obligation to ensure I live the rest of my life in comfort and dignity." I looked at the woman who had spent 34 years treating me like an emotional punching bag. I looked at the woman who had tried to steal my identity less than 24 hours ago. "You do not have a moral obligation from me, Mother," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as the concrete steps we were standing on. "And you certainly are not moving into my property." I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored black blazer and pulled out a glossy trifold paper brochure. I had picked it up from a social worker friend weeks ago, anticipating this exact scenario. I held it out to her. Brenda frowned hesitantly, reaching out to take the brochure. She looked down at the cover. The glossy print displayed a drab institutional brick building surrounded by a flat, barren landscape. The bold text across the top read, "Shady Pines Care Center, a state-funded low-income Medicare facility located in a remote rural town 3 hours south of Chicago." "What is this?" Brenda demanded, her voice losing its fragile tremor and sharpening into genuine outrage. "That is your new reality," I explained clinically. "You have 0 assets, 0 retirement savings, and a severely flagged credit profile due to your recent felony fraud attempt. You cannot sign a lease anywhere in the state of Illinois. This specific facility accepts destitute individuals who rely entirely on government assistance. It is clean, it is heavily monitored, and it is exactly 3 hours away from me. I have already submitted your preliminary intake paperwork. Brenda crushed the brochure in her fist. Her face turned a violent shade of purple. She was trembling with an uncontrollable white-hot rage. I will not go to a state-run facility for poor people, she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. I am a respectable woman. I deserve luxury. I will not let you throw me away like garbage. If you force me into that awful place, I will end it all. I swear to God, Rebecca, I will kill myself right here on this front lawn. I will make sure the entire world knows you drove your own mother to suicide. It was her ultimate trump card, the ultimate emotional blackmail she had used to control my father for decades. I did not gasp. I did not plead with her to calm down. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped the screen. I held the bright display right up to her face. The numbers 911 were already typed into the keypad. My thumb hovered directly over the green call button. Press it. I challenged her, maintaining intense, unblinking eye contact. If you threaten to harm yourself, I am legally obligated to contact emergency services. The county sheriffs are standing right at the bottom of the driveway. They will immediately place you under a 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold. You will be stripped of your cashmere sweater, dressed in a paper gown, and locked in a sterile hospital ward with absolutely no outside contact. And when they finally release you, a social worker will place you directly into that exact Medicare facility. Brenda stared at the glowing green button on my phone screen. She looked at my cold, calculating eyes and saw absolutely zero hesitation. The realization crashed down on her with crushing weight. Her manipulation was completely dead. The invisible strings she had used to control me were permanently severed. She slowly lowered her crushed fist. Her shoulders slumped and a hollow, vacant look washed over her face. She stepped back completely and utterly defeated. Without another word, she turned around, grabbed her vintage leather suitcases, and dragged them slowly down the concrete driveway toward the waiting taxi. She did not look back at the sprawling brick mansion, and she certainly did not look at her crying daughter sitting on the damp grass. Survival was always my mother's priority, and she knew there was nothing left to salvage here. The taxi drove away, leaving Samantha alone with her black plastic garbage bags. The following weeks were a masterclass in the absolute destruction of a fraudulent empire. Terrence had his preliminary bail hearing in federal court. His appointed public defender argued for house arrest, but the judge took one look at the offshore Cayman Island accounts and deemed him an extreme flight risk. With his assets completely frozen by the federal government, Terrence could not afford to post a cash bond anyway. He was remanded to a federal detention center, trading his custom-tailored designer suits for a bright orange canvas jumpsuit. He was no longer a wealthy visionary. He was just another inmate waiting for trial. Samantha experienced a much different kind of prison. The social fallout was merciless. The 30 affluent women who had fled her backyard patio that afternoon did exactly what high society housewives do best. They talked. The news of the massive FBI raid, the foreclosure, and Terrence's secret Miami sugar baby spread through the wealthy suburbs like wildfire. Her supposedly loyal friends did not just abandon her. They completely erased her from their lives. They blocked her phone number and removed her from every social media platform. When she desperately tried to call her country club sponsor for a small loan, the assistant threatened to file a harassment complaint. Without my financial support, Samantha hit rock bottom with terrifying speed. She managed to secure a tiny rundown studio apartment on the far south side of the city, using pawned jewelry for the deposit. To pay for her mounting legal consultation fees, the former golden child was forced to get a real job. Samantha was hired as a cashier at a massive local discount retail store. She spent her days scanning cheap plastic goods under harsh fluorescent lights, wearing a scratchy, highly uncomfortable polyester uniform vest. Her perfect blonde hair grew out, revealing dark roots, and her manicured nails chipped and broke from hauling heavy boxes in the stockroom. But the crushing weight of minimum wage labor quickly became far too much for her fragile, inflated ego to handle anymore. 3 weeks after the eviction, my desk phone rang in my executive office. It was the head of building security down in the main lobby. He sounded incredibly uncomfortable as he informed me that a frantic woman claiming to be my sister was causing a massive scene at the front desk, aggressively demanding to see me. I opened the live security camera feed on my computer monitor. Standing in the pristine marble lobby of my elite accounting firm was Samantha. She looked entirely unrecognizable. She was still wearing her blue polyester discount store uniform vest, her shoulders hunched, her face pale and exhausted. I picked up the phone and told the guard to put her on speaker. Rebecca Samantha's voice echoed through the phone speaker, sounding incredibly small and desperate. "Please, you have to talk to me. The discount store cut my hours. I cannot afford my rent next week. I know your firm has a huge administrative staff. I can file papers, I can answer phones, I will work for minimum wage. Just give me a clerical job in your department. You are the only person left who can help me." I stared at the live security feed. I looked at the pathetic woman who had laughed openly when I was so cruelly mocked at a $4,000 dinner. I looked at the entitled woman who had gladly spent my stolen money to fund her completely arrogant illusion. "Samantha," I said coldly through the lobby speakerphone, "my firm handles highly sensitive corporate fraud investigations. We require absolute integrity from every single employee. You are currently legally implicated in a massive federal Ponzi scheme. You are a severe liability to this institution. Rebecca, please!" She sobbed loudly, clutching the reception desk. I did not let her finish. "Escort her off the premises immediately," I instructed the head of security. "If she returns, issue a formal trespass warning and call the Chicago police." I hung up the phone without a word. On the monitor, I watched the two security guards grab her arms and firmly walk her out the revolving glass doors into the busy street. I watched the two security guards grab her arms and firmly walk her out the revolving glass doors into the busy street. The image of Samantha shrinking into the crowded Chicago sidewalk was the final closure I needed. I closed the security window on my monitor and turned my attention back to my work. My toxic family had been completely excised from my life, but the financial fallout of Terrence's massive fraud was just beginning to bear fruit for me. 3 months later, I found myself sitting in a sleek, heavily secured conference room at the regional headquarters of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The atmosphere was entirely different from the desperate, sweat-soaked panic of Terrence's failed gala. Sitting across from me were 3 senior SEC enforcement directors and a federal prosecutor. Spread out on the massive oak table between us was my 300-page forensic audit, heavily tabbed and covered in highlighter marks. The lead director, a sharp woman in a tailored navy suit, closed the final folder and looked up at me with genuine professional admiration. "Rebecca, your documentation was absolutely flawless," she stated, her tone reflecting deep respect. "When Terrence Harrison attempted to hide the remaining stolen venture capital, he utilized a highly complex web of offshore Cayman shell companies. It usually takes our internal forensic teams over a year to pierce that kind of corporate veil. Because you handed us the exact routing numbers, the IP tracking logs, and the authorized signatures, we moved immediately." The federal prosecutor nodded in agreement, sliding a formal legal document across the table. "We successfully froze and recovered over $14 million in stolen investor funds before Terrence could transfer them into untraceable cryptocurrency wallets," he explained. "Those defrauded investors you saw at the hotel will actually be getting a significant portion of their life savings back. Terrence is currently looking at 25 years in federal prison, and Samantha is facing a minimum of 5 years for her direct role as the signatory on the fraudulent accounts. The trial will be a swift formality." But the federal agents had not called me into their headquarters simply to thank me for my civic duty. The Securities and Exchange Commission operates a highly lucrative whistleblower reward program designed specifically to incentivize financial insiders to report massive corporate fraud. Under federal law, a whistleblower whose original information leads to a successful enforcement action, resulting in sanctions over $1 million, is legally entitled to an award of between 10 and 30% of the total recovered funds. The lead director handed me a heavy gold embossed envelope. Because your unparalleled investigative work directly led to the immediate recovery of $14 million, the Commission has authorized the maximum statutory payout, she announced with a rare smile. I opened the envelope. Inside was a certified federal treasury notice, confirming a direct wire transfer into my primary corporate holding account. The bounty was a staggering $4.2 million. It was completely tax-free. I had spent my entire adult life building my wealth, quietly sacrificing my own luxury to support a family that despised me. Now, in a single afternoon, my net worth had more than doubled. I thanked the directors, shook their hands, and walked out of the federal building with the absolute certainty that I would never have to worry about a single financial calculation for the rest of my life. With millions of dollars in liquid cash sitting in my accounts, I decided it was finally time to make a purely emotional investment. I did not buy a flashy sports car or a massive suburban mansion. I made a very quiet, highly aggressive commercial real estate purchase through my primary holding company. Exactly 2 weeks later, I dressed in a stunning custom-tailored ivory suit and ordered a private town car. I arrived at the exact same high-end Chicago steakhouse where my family had attempted to bankrupt me just months prior. The restaurant was completely empty, preparing for the lucrative evening dinner rush. I walked through the heavy glass doors and stood in the dim, romantic lighting of the main dining room. The general manager, the tall, imposing man in the sharp tuxedo who had threatened to have me arrested over Terrence's declined credit cards, was standing near the host stand. He looked up, his brow furrowing as he tried to place my face. "Can I help you, Miss?" the manager asked, his tone perfectly polite, but laced with his usual arrogant steel. "We are not currently open for service." I smiled, a cold, calculated expression. "I am not here for a steak," I replied smoothly. "My name is Rebecca. My corporate holding entity finalized the purchase of this entire restaurant group yesterday morning. I am the new majority owner." The manager froze, all the color draining from his face as the memory of the $4,000 dine and dash finally clicked in his brain. He remembered the woman who had calmly left a $20 bill and walked out while her family faced the police. "Ma'am," he stammered nervously, taking a quick step back. "I was simply following restaurant protocol that evening." It was a severe misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, I assured him, looking him dead in the eye. "You were doing your job, and now you are officially relieved of your duties. You have exactly 10 minutes to clear out your office before I have security escort you off my property." The manager opened his mouth to argue, but the cold reality of my statement silenced him completely. He knew I had the authority and the absolute ruthlessness to back it up. He surrendered his master keys, placed them quietly on the polished mahogany host stand, and walked toward the back office with his shoulders slumped in total defeat. I took a deep breath of the rich cedar-scented air of the dining room. It smelled like absolute victory. I walked out of the steakhouse that evening, leaving the shattered ego of the former manager behind me, and stepped into the crisp Chicago night. I did not return to my comfortable downtown condo. That chapter of my life, the era of hiding my success to appease the fragile insecurities of my toxic family, was officially closed. Instead, I directed my private driver to the Gold Coast. I had utilized a fraction of my massive federal whistleblower reward to purchase a sprawling multi-level penthouse occupying the entire top floor of a premier high-rise. The private elevator doors opened directly into my new sanctuary. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered an unobstructed 360-degree panoramic view of the glowing city skyline and the dark, vast expanse of Lake Michigan. I poured myself a generous glass of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon from my newly stocked climate-controlled wine cellar and walked slowly out onto the expansive private terrace. The wind whipped around me cool and fierce, but I did not shiver. I stood at the edge of the glass railing looking down at the millions of glittering lights below and took a deep, uninterrupted breath of pure, absolute freedom. For 34 years, my mother and my sister had aggressively weaponized my personal life against me. They had relentlessly pushed the narrative that because I was an unmarried woman without children, my existence was somehow tragic, incomplete, and devoid of true meaning. Society loves to echo that exact same sentiment. The culture dictates that a single woman in her mid-30s is a cautionary tale. In their twisted worldview, a woman's value was strictly determined by the carat size of her engagement ring and the affluent status of the man standing next to her in the country club photos. They hurled the word spinster at me like it was a terminal diagnosis. They genuinely believed that my quiet evenings spent analyzing corporate ledgers and building my investment portfolio were desperate coping mechanisms for a lonely, pathetic life. Extended relatives used to offer me pitying looks at holiday dinners, whispering unsolicited advice about lowering my standards before my biological clock ran out. But as I stood high above the city, completely untouched by the catastrophic ruin they had brought upon themselves, I realized the absolute truth. My lack of a husband and children was never a flaw. It was the very armor that had protected me. Being unattached meant I was completely unburdened. I did not have a narcissistic partner draining my joint accounts to fund a secret life in Miami. I did not have to compromise my morals, my financial stability, or my own sanity to maintain a desperate, fraudulent illusion of domestic perfection. The immense societal pressure to settle down is exactly what drove Samantha into the arms of a charismatic scam artist. She wanted the perfect family image so badly that she willingly ignored every single red flag, signing her name to fraudulent offshore accounts just to keep up appearances. While Samantha was busy tying her entire identity and survival to a criminal, I was quietly building an impenetrable fortress of wealth, knowledge, and sheer independence. My single status was not a symptom of being unlovable. It was a conscious, calculated shield that allowed me to forge an untouchable empire on my own terms. I never had to ask for permission to invest my money. I never had to shrink myself to stroke a fragile male ego. I was the sole architect of my destiny. Down there, somewhere in the sprawling grid of city streets, Terrence was sitting in a cold concrete federal cell facing decades of incarceration. Samantha was likely finishing a grueling minimum wage shift under harsh fluorescent lights, returning to a cramped, empty studio apartment to face the terrifying reality of her impending criminal trial. And 3 hours south, in a sterile state-funded Medicare facility, my mother was finally experiencing the exact life she actually deserved, stripped of her stolen luxuries and her captive audience. They had chased the illusion of the perfect family so recklessly that it completely destroyed them. I took a slow sip of the rich red wine, letting the complex flavors settle on my tongue. The silence of my penthouse was no longer the heavy, suffocating isolation my family had always accused me of suffering from. It was a luxurious, golden peace. There were no more frantic phone calls demanding emergency cash transfers. There were no more tearful guilt trips, no more forged legal documents, and no more aggressive ambushes at my front door. The heavy, toxic anchor I had been dragging behind me for my entire adult life had finally been cut loose. I leaned against the cool glass of the balcony railing, feeling the powerful hum of the city vibrating through the architecture. I had survived their constant psychological warfare, dismantled their fraudulent schemes, and reclaimed every single ounce of my stolen dignity. I looked out over the glittering Chicago skyline, raising my crystal glass in a silent, solitary toast to the magnificent empire I had built entirely by myself. They said blood is thicker than water, but they forgot that water can wash away the filth. I am the water, and I have never felt more clean. The story of Rebecca and her family offers a brutal but necessary lesson on the dangers of tying your self-worth to superficial milestones. Samantha and Terrence built a fragile house of cards based on the illusion of wealth and traditional success, which ultimately led to their catastrophic downfall. In contrast, Rebecca's journey highlights that independence, financial literacy, and the courage to set ironclad boundaries against toxic relatives are not signs of loneliness, but of profound strength. True security comes from self-reliance, not a curated social image. Evaluate your own boundaries today and ensure you are building your life on authenticity, not external validation. This story is an intense but grounded reminder that the phrase "blood is thicker than water" should never be used as a free pass for financial or emotional abuse. Let me know if you would like to explore more writing prompts or themes like this.